A stolen jewel, an elusive trail, and an unlikely culprit. Welcome to Revenge Oath. Your comments make this even better. Where are you watching from today? Stay with me. The hunt for the Blue Carbuncle begins now. It was upon a bitter December morning, with a light fog curling along Baker Street and the first hints of frost stiffening the window panes, that I was summoned once more into the sphere of my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes. The Christmas season was near at hand, though in our lodgings there was little of its festivity. The only greenery was a sprig of holly that Mrs. Hudson had set above the mantel, its scarlet berries vivid against the coal dust. Holmes himself reclined in his armchair, long legs stretched, his pipe sending up languid coils of smoke as he stared into the fire, with that abstracted gaze which always betokened some new and singular case. "You are just in time, Watson," said he, as I laid aside my greatcoat. "Another 5 minutes, and you would have found me quite insufferable with boredom. As it stands, we may both thank Providence, or perhaps human folly, for a mystery of the rarest quality." I expressed my willingness to be enlightened, but Holmes did not immediately respond. Instead, he pointed with the stem of his pipe to the small side table. Upon it rested a velvet-lined case of the sort favoured by jewellers, the lid thrown back to reveal a glittering object nestled within. The gem, if gem indeed it was, caught the morning light with a brilliance that seemed almost unnatural. It was a deep, cerulean stone, perfectly cut, of a size that dwarfed even the famed diamonds of the crown jewels. Yet its radiance was not cold like that of a diamond, but glowed with a curious inner warmth, as though a flame had been trapped within the crystal depths. "By heaven, Holmes!" I exclaimed. "What is that marvel?" "The Blue Carbuncle," he replied quietly. "A stone whose history, if half the stories are true, would make your hair stand on end, stolen last night under the most extraordinary circumstances. Before I could inquire further, our door was flung open, and in strode Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, his lean frame rigid with suppressed excitement. His keen eyes darted first to the jewel, then to Holmes. "You have it, then?" he cried. "I might have known. Blast it, Holmes, you are always a step ahead. But tell me, how under heaven did it come into your possession, when half the Yard has been scouring London for it since dawn?" Holmes permitted himself a faint smile. "You will forgive me if I preserve a certain measure of suspense, Inspector. Sit down, and we shall proceed with order. But first, let me understand from your own lips the nature of the affair as reported to the police. Watson here must have the full picture, if he is to serve, as ever, as our chronicler." Lestrade's impatience was plain, yet he complied. He drew a handkerchief across his brow, for though the morning was chill, his exertions and excitement had flushed his cheeks. "Very well," he said. "The facts are these. Last evening, at a fashionable gathering in Grosvenor Square, Lady Charlotte Winterbourne, daughter of the Earl of Ravenscliffe, was to display her celebrated heirloom, the Blue Carbuncle, to a circle of guests. The stone was kept under lock in her private safe until the appointed hour. When the safe was opened before witnesses, however, the jewel had vanished." "A locked safe, yet the contents are gone?" I interjected. "Precisely, Doctor." "No sign of forced entry. The key never left Lady Charlotte's possession, or so she swears. Only household members and guests of the highest respectability were present. The commotion was immediate, as you may imagine. The house was searched from cellar to garret, the servants questioned, the guests detained. Yet nothing was found." Holmes tapped the arm of his chair thoughtfully. "And what conclusion did the constabulary reach?" Lestrade's lips thinned. "That must have been some trick of the servants. A footman with light fingers, or perhaps the lady's French maid, who has a reputation for impudence. But the difficulty is this. None of them could have approached the safe without being observed. It stands in the boudoir, and Lady Charlotte herself unlocked it before all. The stone should have been there, yet it was not. I tell you, Holmes, it is enough to make a man doubt his senses." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with that peculiar intensity which always heralded the awakening of his faculties. "A puzzle indeed. The stone was in the safe, of that we may be certain." "So Lady Charlotte declares, and she is not hysterical. She placed it there with her own hands that very afternoon." "Then the riddle becomes clear. Either Lady Charlotte is mistaken, which we must not hastily assume, or else the stone was extracted by means so subtle as to elude even her watchful eye. Tell me, Lestrade, how many guests were present?" "Some 20, not counting household members. The Earl himself, several men of Parliament, a handful of officers from the Guards, and 2 or 3 ladies of fashion. Not a rogue among them, or I am no judge." Holmes allowed himself a soft chuckle. "Your faith in human respectability is touching, Inspector. Yet the annals of crime are filled with rogues who wore the mask of gentility with ease. Still, let us not leap ahead. Watson, do you observe anything curious in this affair?" I confessed that I was utterly at a loss. A vanished jewel, a locked safe, a score of reputable witnesses. What explanation could there be but some conjurer's trick beyond the scope of common reason? Holmes rose and began to pace the room. "Consider, my dear fellow, that the gem is here before us now. That is the essential fact. You may ask yourself how it passed from Grosvenor Square to Baker Street in less than 12 hours, through all the vigilance of the yard. That is the true wonder, not the empty safe." At this, Lestrade sprang from his seat. "Then it was you, Holmes! You spirited it away to prove some cursed point of yours." Holmes's laughter rang out. Come, Inspector, do you take me for a common burglar? No, the Blue Carbuncle came to me by a channel both ridiculous and commonplace, but I shall keep that tale for the moment, lest you lose what remains of your composure. Suffice it that the stone is safe, and the greater mystery lies not in recovering it, but in understanding the method of its disappearance. For I assure you, gentlemen, behind this affair there is a hand, both cunning and dangerous. The fire crackled, the fog pressed at the windows, and in that dim chamber the Blue Carbuncle seemed to pulse with a life of its own. I could not shake the sense that we stood at the threshold of one of the strangest adventures in all my acquaintance with Sherlock Holmes. I could not deny that Holmes's words had stirred in me a keen curiosity. How, indeed, had such priceless an object travelled from the boudoir of Lady Charlotte Winterbourne to our modest sitting-room in Baker Street, all within the space of a single night? I pressed my friend for enlightenment, but he only gave that slight tightening of the lips which meant he was resolved, for the moment, to keep his own counsel. "You are torturing us, Holmes," said Lestrade irritably. "If you have the stone, then in heaven's name tell us how it came into your hands. The whole of London is humming with the loss of it." Holmes sank back into his chair, steepling his long fingers beneath his chin. "Patience, Inspector, patience. It is sometimes unwise to display all one's cards before the hand is played. Yet, since you press me, I shall relate enough to set the stage. The Blue Carbuncle did not arrive in my possession by theft, subterfuge, nor even through my own contrivance, but by the simplest accident of the street. Picture it, Watson, an altercation between a rough fellow and a passing tradesman, a hat knocked into the gutter, a goose dropped upon the pavement, and, by the strangest of coincidences, a stone of extraordinary worth concealed within the bird's crop. That, gentlemen, is the chain of absurdities by which the carbuncle lies before us." Lestrade stared, incredulity written on every feature. "A goose?" Do you take me for a child, Holmes? Not at all. It is the very truth. The honest fellow who had been wronged brought me both the hat and the goose, thinking I might return them to their rightful owner. The bird, when prepared for the table, revealed this treasure within. There is a curious justice in the accident, is there not? I could not help laughing at the grotesque nature of the tale, though I knew enough of Holmes to perceive that he had embroidered nothing. "So the goose is our only link to the thief?" I asked. "Precisely, Watson. From the goose to the owner, from the owner to the intermediary, and so along the chain until we reach the hand that placed the jewel within it. That is our task. To most men it would appear a hopeless business, yet in fact it is one of the simplest of problems, provided one does not mislay the thread. The first clue lies in the battered felt hat, which still rests yonder upon the mantel. It has more to say to an attentive eye than a dozen garrulous witnesses. Holmes rose, took the object down, and turned it over in his slender fingers. To me it appeared a disreputable old headpiece, much stained and out of shape, its lining frayed and greasy. But my companion regarded it with a concentration that lent it dignity. Observe, Watson, the size is large, indicating a man of considerable cranial development. The tattered band tells us he had once been prosperous enough to afford good quality, but now fallen on evil days. Here, these faint grease marks and the absence of pomade tell of a man no longer attentive to his appearance. Yet note also the ends of the lining, carefully sewn, though by hand. He is fallen, but proud still, unwilling to discard even a shabby article if it can be repaired. A moral contradiction, is it not? "You astound me," I said honestly. "From a hat, all that?" Lestrade snorted. "Fine theories, but they'll not hold water in court. We want names, Holmes, not philosophies, and names you shall have," said Holmes quietly. For inside the lining I discovered a small tag, the mark of a poulterer's shop in Covent Garden. The bird was purchased there, no doubt. It remains only to trace the buyer, and the goose will tell us more than you imagine. Come, Watson, you are fond of a morning walk. Let us stretch our legs in Covent Garden while our friend the inspector digests this improbable breakfast," Lestrade muttered, half in amusement, half in annoyance. But he followed us nevertheless. The fog had thinned somewhat, though the air was still sharp with frost. London bustled with its usual winter morning energy, cabmen urging on their horses, costermongers calling their wares, and ragged children shivering against the walls. Holmes led the way with brisk steps, his thin frame wrapped in his grey ulster, his eyes darting with restless animation at each passing face and signboard, as though every trifle were grist to his mill. In due time we reached the market. Covent Garden, with its riot of stalls and shouting dealers, presented a scene of noisy abundance. Poulterers cried the merits of their fowls, butchers displayed carcasses that gleamed in the pale light, and everywhere the air was rich with the mingled scents of straw, blood, and cold feathers. Holmes threaded the crowd with purposeful haste until he halted before a modest shop, with the very sign whose duplicate he had shown us upon the hat. The proprietor, a florid man in an apron, eyed us with suspicion as we entered. "What can I do for you, gentlemen?" he asked, polishing his hands on his apron. Holmes lifted his hat politely. "I believe you sold a goose, marked with a small tag, to a gentleman who left his hat behind in the street last night." "We wish to trace the bird's provenance." The man frowned. "We sell many geese, sir. Hundreds in the past week alone. It is the season, you see, quite. But this particular bird was one of a lot supplied, I believe, to a certain club or society. I am persuaded you can help us identify which." The poulterer hesitated, then nodded. I did indeed supply a small number to the Alpha Inn, not far from here. The landlord ordered them specially for his regulars. Perhaps your man had one of those Holmes's eyes gleamed. Excellent. The Alpha Inn, you say? That narrows our search considerably. I thank you for your courtesy, sir. With that he turned on his heel, drawing us back into the bustling market. Lestrade trudged beside us, plainly perplexed. "And what now, Holmes?" I asked. "Now, my dear Watson, we follow the trail. Each link is as plain as stepping stones across a brook, from the Alpha Inn to its customer, from him perhaps to the true culprit. Already I perceive the shape of our quarry, though the picture is not yet complete. But mark me, the man who dared hide the Blue Carbuncle in such grotesque fashion is no ordinary criminal. His mind is keen, his nerve considerable. We tread on dangerous ground. I could not suppress a shiver, though whether from the chill air or from Holmes's tone I cannot say. For in his voice was that rare note of anticipation which I had learned to associate only with the most formidable of adversaries. And thus, from a shabby hat and a Christmas goose, we found ourselves upon the threshold of a case that promised to tax all the powers of my remarkable friend. The Alpha Inn stood in a narrow street a short walk from the market, its signboard creaking faintly in the morning breeze. It was not a house of any pretension, but rather one of those comfortable public establishments where tradesmen and clerks found cheer in a warm fire and a foaming glass. Holmes pushed open the door without hesitation, and we entered into a snug bar-room where the landlord himself, a portly fellow with genial whiskers, was polishing tankards behind the counter. "Good morning, sir," Holmes began in his most amiable manner. "I am given to understand that you recently procured a number of geese from the market, which you distributed among certain of your patrons." The landlord looked from Holmes to Lestrade and then to me, as though weighing whether this inquiry might presage trouble. "That I did, gentlemen. A fine lot they were, too. Is there some complaint?" "Not at all," Holmes assured him. "On the contrary, their quality was beyond reproach. Yet one particular bird has given rise to a curious circumstance, and it is of the utmost importance that we discover to whom it was allotted." The man frowned, setting down his tankard. "Well, I can tell you this much. I received a dozen birds, and I gave them to the regulars who had subscribed in advance. There was old Mr. Henry Baker, for one. He's had his Christmas goose from me these 5 years. Then there was Mr. Windigate, the stationer, and 2 or 3 others. I could make you a list, if you please. Mr. Henry Baker," Holmes repeated, and I could see his eyes gleaming with recognition. "Would this gentleman be a man of middle years, rather tall, with a large head, and a somewhat neglected appearance?" The landlord chuckled. "You've painted him to life, sir. The poor fellow has seen better days, but he keeps his dignity." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me, for it was plain that the owner of the hat had been found. He inclined his head to the landlord. "You have rendered us a great service. If you would be so kind as to provide Mr. Baker's address, I shall see that no inconvenience comes to you." A moment later, we were again in the street, with Lestrade tugging irritably at his gloves. "So we have our man, this Henry Baker. Shall I put the yard on him at once?" Holmes shook his head. "By no means. Our Mr. Baker is no villain. He is, if my deductions are sound, a harmless fellow who has fallen upon straitened times. He is, however, our key to the next link in the chain. It is through him that the jewel passed into the goose, and through him that we may trace it farther back. We found Baker at his lodgings that very afternoon. He was a melancholy figure indeed. His tall frame stooped, his clothes threadbare, and his manner subdued by long familiarity with disappointment. Yet there lingered about him the vestiges of a once prosperous man, for his speech was refined, and his hands bore the marks of gentler employment. He received us with courtesy tinged with apprehension, for the sight of Lestrade's uniformed presence would have unsettled any man. "Mr. Baker," said Holmes, "but we have come regarding a small matter, which I hope will end to your satisfaction. You were lately in possession of a goose and a hat, both of which by misadventure you lost in the street. The bird has since been eaten, but the hat remains. I thought you might wish for its return." A faint flush touched the man's cheeks. "Indeed I would, sir. It was poor enough, but mine was mine. I had thought it was gone forever." Holmes handed him the shabby headpiece, which Baker received with a gratitude almost touching. "Might I ask," Holmes continued, "from whom you obtained the goose?" "From the Alpha Inn, as I do each Christmas," Baker replied. "I paid my subscription early, and the landlord delivered it to me in good time. Alas, in the scuffle that followed, I lost both goose and hat, and so my family's feast was spoiled. Yet if the matter is closed, gentlemen, I am content." Holmes studied him keenly. "You have not, I think, the faintest suspicion that the bird you lost contained anything unusual?" Baker shook his head, bewildered. "Contained? A goose? Surely not, sir. What should it contain?" "No matter," Holmes said smoothly. "Rest assured, no harm comes to you from the loss. Indeed, you may count yourself fortunate, for the bird might have brought you more trouble than pleasure." With that enigmatic remark, Holmes bowed us out, leaving Baker to his astonishment. Once in the street again, Lestrade could no longer contain his vexation. "Come, Holmes, this is child's play. The man admits he had the goose. Why not press him? Why not charge him with the theft?" "Because," Holmes answered patiently, "the man is innocent. The jewel never belonged to him. Consider, Inspector, he subscribed in advance to the Alpha Inn. The landlord obtained the birds from the poulterer, who in turn purchased them in bulk. Mr. Baker could not have chosen that particular goose any more than he could have chosen one star among the heavens. The stone came into the bird before it ever reached his hands." Lestrade frowned, but said nothing. I, however, felt a surge of admiration for Holmes's clarity. "Then our path is plain," I said. "We must discover the source from which the poulterer obtained his geese." "Precisely, Watson. The chain grows longer, yet it remains unbroken. Each step leads us backward, nearer to the mind that conceived such an audacious plan." That evening, by lamplight, we returned to Covent Garden. Holmes engaged the poulterer once more, this time with sharper questioning. At first the man protested ignorance, but Holmes's calm persistence soon bore fruit. The lot of birds, he admitted, had not been raised by himself, but purchased from a breeder in Brixton, one Mr. James Ryder, head attendant at the Hotel Cosmopolitan, who maintained a small flock for extra income. The name seemed to strike some chord within Holmes, though he gave no outward sign beyond a narrowing of the eyes. "Mr. Ryder, you say? That is a name to be remembered. We shall call upon him at once." As we quitted the shop, I ventured to ask Holmes if he suspected Ryder of deeper involvement. He replied in a low voice, "Patience, my dear Watson. The truth lies close at hand, but the snare must be set with care. Ryder is not merely a breeder of geese, he is also a man with access to wealth, jewels, and temptation. I think we are about to meet the true heart of this mystery." And so, under the cold gleam of the gas lamps, with the Blue Carbuncle secure in Holmes's pocket, we made our way toward Brixton, each step carrying us nearer to the shadowy figure who had dared weave such an unlikely scheme. The lamps burned dimly along the Brixton road as our cab jolted over the cobbles. Holmes sat silent, his sharp profile etched against the misty glass, his long fingers drumming upon his knee. I knew the gesture well. It was the rhythm of a mind already racing far in advance of our journey, arranging fragments into order, shaping chaos into logic. Lestrade, opposite us, shifted impatiently, plainly eager for an arrest. At length, we drew up before a modest house set back from the road, its small garden half lost in the fog. Holmes alighted first and knocked firmly. After some delay, the door was opened by a woman with tired eyes and a shawl drawn close about her shoulders. Holmes inquired whether Mr. Ryder was within, and with a suspicious glance at our party, she admitted us into a narrow passage, smelling faintly of poultry and damp straw. We were shown into a cramped parlour, where presently Ryder himself entered, a slight man of nervous manner, with quick, darting eyes that seemed unable to rest. He greeted us with forced politeness, though his gaze lingered uneasily upon Lestrade's uniform. "Mr. Ryder," said Holmes pleasantly, "I believe you supplied a lot of geese to the Alpha Inn by way of the Covent Garden poulterer." Ryder inclined his head. "That is true, sir. I keep a small flock for profit, nothing more." Holmes seated himself with an air of leisure, though I saw the keen watchfulness in his every movement. "And yet one bird from that flock has caused a stir far beyond its humble destiny. It came into my possession, and within it was discovered an object of considerable worth. Do you follow me, Mr. Ryder?" The man's face paled. He moistened his lips, attempting a laugh. "An object? In a goose? You must be joking. Jest is foreign to me," Holmes said gravely. "The object was the Blue Carbuncle, stolen from Lady Charlotte Winterbourne's safe at Grosvenor Square." For an instant Ryder's mask slipped, his hands clenched, and his eyes flickered with fear, before he forced a smile. "I know nothing of jewels, sir. My business is fowls. Perhaps one of the birds swallowed some bright trinket by chance." Holmes leaned forward. "Geese do not swallow sapphires, Mr. Ryder. And certainly not one locked within a lady's safe. The chain is clear. Lady Charlotte's stone disappears. The same night a goose from your flock conceals it, and now the gem is in my keeping. You stand at the crossing of these facts. How do you explain it?" The man wavered visibly, his composure cracking beneath Holmes's steady gaze. Lestrade shifted in his chair, eager to pounce, but Holmes raised a hand to restrain him. "Come, Ryder," he continued, his tone softer now. "You are not fashioned for villainy. Confession will ease you. You had access to the Hotel Cosmopolitan. You handled Lady Charlotte's property. The temptation was great, the opportunity greater. The question is, were you alone in this folly, or did another guide your hand?" At this, Ryder started up, wringing his hands in agitation. "No more, sir, I beg you." "I am an honest man, I swear it. I never touched the lady's safe." Holmes regarded him coldly. "So you say. Yet your fear betrays you. Still, I shall not force you. The truth has its own way of emerging, and I fancy it will not tarry long." We left him, trembling in his parlour, his wife watching us from the threshold with anxious eyes. Once in the street, Lestrade burst out. "That is enough for me, Holmes." He all but confessed. I shall have him clapped in irons before the hour is out. Holmes shook his head. "Restrain yourself, Inspector. Ryder is deeply entangled, yes, but his manner speaks of a man caught in another's snare. He is terrified, not cunning. No, there is a darker figure behind this, one who contrived both the theft and its concealment." "Then who?" I asked. "That, Watson, is the question that pricks me. Ryder's terror is real, but I noted also his hesitation when I pressed him on an accomplice. There is someone he fears more than the law. Until we unmask that presence, an arrest would be premature." We returned to Baker Street with the fog closing thickly around us. Holmes flung himself into his chair with restless energy, the Blue Carbuncle glittering on the table between us like some malignant eye. He paced, smoked, paused, and paced again, every nerve strung tight. At last he spoke. "Consider the facts, Watson. The stone is placed in a goose. Why? Clearly, to transport it without detection. But geese are not tokens handed to strangers. They pass within a small circle, from breeder to poulterer to known customers. The plan was reckless unless the recipient was predetermined. Yet Ryder's flock was divided among many. The risk of mischance was immense. It is too clumsy for the master criminal I glimpse in the shadows." "You believe, then, that Ryder was but a tool?" "Undoubtedly. He was persuaded, or compelled, to place the stone within a bird. Perhaps he thought it a clever hiding place to be retrieved later, but the scheme miscarried, and now he trembles at discovery. No, Watson, the true author of this crime is yet at large, and it is he we must draw forth." I glanced at Lestrade, who sat frowning into the fire. "And how do you propose to do so?" Holmes' eyes lit with sudden resolve. "By baiting the trap. Ryder's fear will drive him to his confederate, and when he does we shall be ready. But patience, patience. The game must ripen before the snare can close." He settled once more into his chair, fingers steepled, gaze intent upon the jewel. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and within, the Blue Carbuncle shone with a sinister brilliance, as though mocking our efforts. I felt with a strange certainty that the case had entered a darker stage, and that the peril Holmes had hinted at was now gathering around us. For though we had traced the stone from hat to goose, from poulterer to breeder, the hand that had first drawn it from Lady Charlotte's safe remained hidden in the mist, waiting, watching, and, perhaps, even then, plotting its next move. The fire had burned low, its glow throwing long shadows across the sitting room, when Holmes suddenly sprang to his feet with that abrupt energy which always signified that a new current of thought had seized him. He crossed to the window, pushed it open despite the night chill, and leaned out into the fog-laden air as though the clamour of London might bring him counsel. "Watson," he said at length, drawing back, "this affair is not confined to Ryder. There is a guiding intelligence behind him, one who devised the theft and left Ryder to bear the peril. We must bring that figure into the open, and to do so we must first press Ryder to act." "How will you achieve that?" I asked, for Ryder had already seemed on the brink of collapse. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "By showing him that the stone is not lost, as he hopes, but recovered, and that its recovery will force his hand. He will then hurry to his accomplice, whether in supplication or in desperation. Either way, we shall have them both." Lestrade, who had listened with growing impatience, muttered that Ryder ought to be under lock and key at once. Holmes waved him down. "If you cage the bird too soon, Inspector, you frighten off the hawk that circles above it. Let him flutter a little longer, and the hawk will stoop." The plan was not long in execution. The next morning, Holmes dispatched a note in his neat, precise hand, requesting Ryder's attendance at Baker Street on urgent business. We had scarcely finished our breakfast when a timid knock was heard, and the man was shown in. His appearance was pitiable, pale, hollow-eyed, and trembling as though he expected every moment to hear the clink of irons at his wrists. Holmes received him with grave courtesy. "Mr. Ryder, I have invited you here because the Blue Carbuncle has been restored to its rightful place of safekeeping. Scotland Yard is satisfied for the present to pursue the matter no further. Yet I perceive that you are in sore distress. Will you not relieve your conscience by speaking freely?" For a moment Ryder could only stare, his lips working soundlessly. Then, with a sudden collapse of all pretense, He fell upon his knees before Holmes, clutching at his hands in a frenzy of supplication. "For God's sake, sir, shield me! I never meant harm, I was drawn into it. If they take me, I am ruined, utterly ruined." Holmes disengaged himself firmly. "Compose yourself, man. No one shall harm you if you tell me the truth. Who was it that persuaded you to meddle with Lady Charlotte's jewel?" Ryder buried his face in his hands. "I dare not speak his name. He would kill me. I thought to hide the stone in a goose, as he instructed, until I might return it to him. But the bird was lost, I know not how, and I have lived in torment since." "His name," Holmes pressed, his voice cold and inexorable. But Ryder only shook his head in abject terror. "I cannot. Don't ask." Holmes regarded him with a mixture of disdain and pity. "Very well. Then I shall name him. It was one with means to approach Lady Charlotte's safe, with knowledge of her household, and with cunning enough to employ you as his tool. Does the name Horner stir your memory?" At that Ryder gave a strangled cry. No, not Horner. He is but a workman, a scapegoat. The true master is—" He broke off suddenly, biting his lip until the blood came, his whole frame shaking. Holmes's eyes glittered. "So there is indeed a master. Take care, Ryder, your silence serves him better than it serves you. If you will not aid us, then we must watch to whom you fly for counsel. That, I think, will reveal all we need." He dismissed Ryder with a gesture, and the wretched man stumbled from the room, his face ashen. When the door had closed, Lestrade exclaimed, "You had him ready to confess. Why let him go?" "Because," Holmes replied quietly, "his next step will betray the man he fears. He is too weak to act alone. He will hasten to his accomplice, and we shall be waiting." That evening, Holmes's prediction was fulfilled. A boy in the irregulars brought word that Ryder had been seen slipping into a cab near the Strand, glancing about him like a hunted animal. Holmes wasted no time. We followed with Lestrade at our side until the cab drew up before the rear entrance of a grand house in Mayfair. Ryder vanished within, and Holmes touched my arm. "This is the lair, Watson. Now we must discover whose it is." The house, lit from within by the soft glow of lamps, was one of wealth and consequence. A crest upon the door announced the residence of Sir Reginald Darrow, a name not unknown in political circles, a man of reputation and ambition. Holmes's eyes narrowed as he took in the details. "Sir Reginald," he murmured. "A patron of Lady Charlotte's soirees, a man of influence at the very heart of society. If he is indeed our quarry, then the affair runs deeper than I had thought." We lingered in the shadow of a mews, watching. Presently Ryder emerged once more, his face still haggard, but now set with grim resolve. He hailed another cab and disappeared into the fog. Holmes did not stir to follow. "Enough," he said. "We know the quarter to which he flies for protection. Tomorrow, Watson, we shall pay Sir Reginald a visit, though not in the character he expects. Tonight we plan the snare." I looked at him in awe. His whole being seemed illuminated by the chase, his lean features sharpened by purpose. The Blue Carbuncle lay safe in our rooms, yet the true drama of the case was only now beginning to unfold. In the fog outside, London moved on unknowing, while within, Holmes's keen mind was already weaving the net that would either unmask a statesman as a thief or reveal a deeper deception still. I scarcely slept that night, for my mind was filled with uneasy conjectures. The notion that a man of Sir Reginald Darrow's standing might be entangled in such villainy seemed almost incredible. Yet Holmes's unerring instinct, sharpened by years of pursuit, seldom pointed amiss. The next morning he appeared at Breakfast in the highest spirits, his keen grey eyes alight with that peculiar energy which comes upon him when a case nears its crisis. "My dear Watson," he said, buttering his toast with unconcern, "today we must step into the lion's den. If Sir Reginald is innocent, we shall soon know it. If guilty, then we may look upon one of the boldest intrigues London has witnessed in a decade. Either way, the matter promises to be instructive. How do you propose to approach him?" I asked, glancing at Lestrade, who had joined us and looked dubious at Holmes's composure. "In the guise of courtesy," Holmes replied. "We will present ourselves not as accusers, but as gentlemen seeking enlightenment. A thief may guard his tongue against threats, but flattery and curiosity have undone stronger men. Ryder's visit has already disturbed his peace. This morning's conversation may unsettle it entirely. Within the hour we were rattling westward in a hansom, the winter fog clinging to the horses' manes and muffling the rumble of wheels. At Mayfair we alighted before the polished door of Sir Reginald's residence, a butler admitting us with solemn dignity. The house spoke of wealth at every turn: oil portraits in gilded frames, carpets of Eastern weave, and a faint scent of cigars lingering in the air. Presently we were shown into a library where Sir Reginald awaited us. He was a tall man, clean-shaven, with a commanding presence and the easy manner of one long accustomed to deference. His eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of surprise at seeing us, though he masked it quickly behind a smile. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he said, extending a hand, "your reputation precedes you. To what do I owe this unexpected honour?" Holmes bowed slightly. "We come, Sir Reginald, upon a delicate matter which touches both society and the law. You were present, I believe, at Lady Charlotte Winterbourne's gathering on the night her celebrated jewel vanished." The faintest tightening of the lips was his only reaction. "I was indeed there. A most unfortunate affair, though I trust the Yard is capable of resolving it without troubling gentlemen of my station." Holmes smiled blandly. "The Yard pursues many avenues, but my own inquiries, I confess, have led me to interesting quarters. Only last night I learned that Mr. James Ryder, head attendant at the Cosmopolitan, sought your counsel in some agitation." At this, Sir Reginald's gaze hardened for an instant before softening again. "Ryder is known to me. He has occasionally provided poultry from his small holding. If he came to me, it was no doubt about some personal business. I cannot imagine how such trifles could interest you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes leaned back, his eyes half closed, his tone deceptively casual. "Trifles, perhaps? Yet when one trifling goose yields a jewel of fabulous worth, one is compelled to take notice. The Blue Carbuncle, Sir Reginald, what say you to that?" A silence hung heavy in the room. Sir Reginald's hand, which had been idly turning a paper knife, stilled upon the desk. Then he gave a short laugh, though it rang hollow. "You amuse yourself at my expense. That ridiculous tale of a stone in a goose, I had thought it a mere newspaper fancy." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Newspapers rarely print what I hold in my pocket." With that, he drew forth the jewel, its deep blue depths flashing in the lamplight. Sir Reginald started despite himself. For the briefest instant his composure cracked, and I saw in his eyes not admiration, but raw, calculating hunger. The mask returned swiftly, but Holmes had already marked the slip. "You see, Watson," he murmured as though to himself, "how truth glimmers when one least expects it." Sir Reginald rose abruptly. "Gentlemen, I have pressing engagements. Unless you bring some formal charge, I must bid you good day." Lestrade half rose, but Holmes touched his arm. "Quite so," he said smoothly. "We would not dream of detaining you, but perhaps you will forgive me one final curiosity. The lock of Lady Charlotte's safe bore no mark of violence. It was opened by a key. Who besides her ladyship possessed such access? Sir Reginald's eyes narrowed. That is a question for Lady Charlotte, not for me. Holmes inclined his head. Indeed. Yet I cannot help recalling that you are among her closest advisers in financial matters, a trusted friend, admitted freely. One wonders whether a trusted friend might not also possess a duplicate key, made, perhaps, with the help of an obliging hotel attendant such as Ryder. The silence that followed was electric. Sir Reginald's nostrils flared, and a dull flush crept up his neck. But he mastered himself once more. "You tread dangerously, Mr. Holmes," he said in a low voice. "I advise you to take care." Holmes smiled faintly. "Danger has always been an old acquaintance of mine." "Come, Watson, Inspector. Our visit is concluded." We withdrew, leaving Sir Reginald standing rigid by his desk. Once outside in the foggy street, Lestrade exclaimed, "That was near to an admission. We must seize him at once." Holmes shook his head, his gaze still fixed upon the darkened windows above. "Not yet. A bird trapped too early may break the net. Let him believe himself safe. Let him believe we are uncertain. His next move will betray the full scope of his scheme. We have shown him the jewel. Now he will show us his desperation." And as we turned away down the silent street, I felt a chill that owed nothing to the fog. For the first time in many cases I sensed that Holmes's adversary was no common criminal, but a man of influence and power who would not hesitate to strike back if pressed too hard. Holmes's prediction that Sir Reginald would make his next move soon proved correct, though the swiftness of it startled even me. We had scarcely returned to Baker Street when a messenger arrived with a sealed envelope addressed in a bold, unfamiliar hand to Holmes himself. He tore it open with a flick of the knife and read it aloud to us. "Mr. Holmes, your interference in matters which do not concern you is both unwise and unwelcome. Cease your inquiries at once, or the consequences will be upon your own head. Consider this your final warning." There was no signature, but the heavy, expensive stationery bore a faint watermark with the crest of a falcon, an emblem I recalled seeing upon the silver cigar case on Sir Reginald's desk that very morning. Lestrade swore under his breath. "That's enough for me. He threatens you openly. We'll have him up at the yard before nightfall." Holmes folded the letter with almost playful care and slipped it into his drawer. "On the contrary, Inspector. A man does not send warnings unless he fears exposure. He has shown his hand too soon. The more desperate his threats, the nearer we are to the truth. But our task is to gather proof, not to clutch at shadows. Until we can lay bare the chain from Lady Charlotte's safe to his pocketbook, he will slip through your fingers as neatly as an eel." I could not but marvel at Holmes's composure. Here was a man threatened by one of the most influential figures in London, and yet he sat, pipe in hand, expounding upon his theories as calmly as though discussing the weather. "Then what is your plan?" I asked. Holmes leaned back, the smoke curling about his head like a halo. "We must draw the accomplice into the open. Ryder is the weak link. His terror makes him reckless, and recklessness breeds mistakes. Tonight, Watson, we will watch him. If he has met once with Sir Reginald, he will meet again. And in those meetings lies the proof we require." True to his word, as dusk fell, we found ourselves in a narrow street off the Strand, concealed within the shadow of an archway. Holmes had engaged one of his Baker Street irregulars to keep a watch on Ryder's lodgings and send word the moment he stirred. Around 9 o'clock, a ragged urchin hurried up to us with the news. Ryder had left his rooms in haste and taken a cab westward. We followed at once. The cab wound through the fog, finally halting at a discreet side door of a gentleman's club near St. James's. From our vantage point across the street, we watched Ryder slip inside, glancing over his shoulder with the hunted look of a man expecting pursuit. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Note the club, Watson, the Falcon. Exclusive, discreet, and frequented by men of influence. Sir Reginald is a member, I have no doubt. It is here that their dealings are conducted, safe from prying eyes. But how are we to follow?" I asked. "No stranger would be admitted." Holmes's thin lips curved into a smile. "You forget, Watson, that I have not worn a disguise these 3 weeks. Tonight it shall serve us well." Within a quarter of an hour, Holmes had transformed himself utterly. Gone was the keen-featured detective. In his place stood a shabby groom, reeking of stables, with stooped shoulders and a slouching gait. I could hardly believe the change. "You, my dear fellow, must wait without," he whispered. "A groom may pass unheeded, but a military doctor is less easily overlooked. Trust me, and keep your revolver ready. We tread among wolves." With that he vanished into the night, and I was left pacing the pavement, my nerves strung to the highest pitch. The minutes dragged intolerably. At last the door opened, and 2 figures emerged. Even at a distance I recognized Ryder's furtive profile, and beside him the tall, imposing form of Sir Reginald Darrow. They spoke in low, urgent tones as they descended the steps, Ryder wringing his hands like a man in despair. Suddenly Holmes appeared at my elbow, so silently that I started. His eyes were alight with triumph. "Quickly, Watson, after them!" Their conversation inside has given me the final piece of the puzzle. Now we must hear what is said in the open, where men speak more freely than they ought. We shadowed the pair through the fog-bound streets, keeping to the darkness. They halted at last beneath a gas lamp in a secluded square. There, Ryder's agitation broke forth in a torrent of words that reached even our ears. "It is no use, sir. He has the stone. He showed it to me with his own hand. We are lost unless you can contrive some means of silencing him." Sir Reginald's voice was low and venomous. "Control yourself, fool. If Holmes has the stone, then he has not yet the proof of how it came into your possession. That is our advantage. Hold your tongue, deny everything, and leave the rest to me. Do you understand?" Ryder groaned, but nodded miserably. Holmes touched my sleeve, signaling silence, but I could feel the suppressed excitement in his grip. We had them. The chain was complete. Ryder the tool, Sir Reginald the master, the Blue Carbuncle the bait. Yet even as I exulted, Holmes's face was grave. "They speak of silencing me, Watson," he murmured. "That is no idle phrase. Sir Reginald is a dangerous man cornered, and a cornered man may strike." We trailed the pair until they parted ways, Ryder slinking back towards the Strand, while Sir Reginald strode in the direction of his Mayfair residence. Holmes drew me into the shelter of a doorway. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice low but steady. We set the snare. Sir Reginald believes himself secure behind his influence and Ryder's silence. We shall show him that the walls of power cannot withstand the truth, but we must act swiftly, for a man who speaks of silencing his enemies will not long delay in striking. And as we returned to Baker Street, I could not shake the feeling that we stood upon the brink of a peril greater than any duel could justify, with Holmes himself, the mark of a man who would stop at nothing to save his reputation. The following day dawned bleak and grey, a heavy mist rolling in from the river and settling upon the streets like a shroud. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated rather than oppressed by the weather. He spent the morning pacing restlessly about our rooms, pausing only to scribble a note or consult one of the many reference volumes that crowded his shelves. "Watson," he said at last, halting abruptly before the fire. "Our adversary is clever, but he has miscalculated in one regard. He believes himself invulnerable behind position and power, yet influence cannot silence a fact once it is demonstrated before impartial eyes. The key to this case lies not in conjecture, but in demonstration. Today we shall prepare the stage upon which Sir Reginald must play a part he did not intend." He seated himself and penned 2 short letters with swift precision. One was dispatched to Scotland Yard, addressed to Lestrade, summoning him to Baker Street that evening. The other, Holmes entrusted to a messenger boy with strict instructions to deliver it into the hands of Lady Charlotte Winterbourne herself. I longed to ask what he had written, but Holmes merely gave me a cryptic smile. "Patience, my dear fellow. A play loses its charm when one reads the last act before the curtain has risen. The remainder of the day passed in an odd quietude." Holmes sat in his chair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his eyes half closed, as though communing with some inner vision. At times he muttered fragments of sentences. "Duplicate key, the goose as diversion, society's shield." But he offered no explanation, and I dared not disturb his concentration. By evening, the fog had thickened, and the lamps outside glowed like dim orbs in a sea of vapour. Lestrade arrived punctually, grumbling about being dragged into yet another of Holmes's theatrical arrangements. A little later, a carriage drew up, and Lady Charlotte herself was shown in. She was a handsome woman of middle years, her bearing proud, though her eyes betrayed both weariness and curiosity. "Mr. Holmes," she said, with a slight inclination of the head, "your note was most insistent. You speak of urgent information concerning my missing jewel. I beg you not to trifle with me, madam," Holmes replied gravely. "I should never dream of trifling where so much is at stake. If you will grant me an hour, I shall either restore your faith in justice or stand forever discredited in your eyes." Before more could be said, the door opened again, and Sir Reginald Darrow was announced. He entered with his usual commanding presence, though I detected a flicker of surprise upon seeing Lady Charlotte and Lestrade already assembled. His eyes darted quickly to Holmes, and for the briefest instant I thought I glimpsed a shadow of unease. "Mr. Holmes," he said smoothly, "your invitation was unexpected. May I ask why I find myself among such company this evening?" "Because, Sir Reginald," Holmes answered, "truth is best revealed in the presence of those whom it concerns most deeply. Tonight I shall demonstrate how the Blue Carbuncle vanished from Lady Charlotte's safe, how it found its way into the crop of a goose, and who engineered this curious chain of events. The silence that followed was profound. Lady Charlotte's breath quickened, Lestrade shifted eagerly in his seat, and Sir Reginald's gaze grew steely. Holmes, however, remained unperturbed, his voice calm and deliberate as he began to lay out the evidence. The safe bore no marks of tampering. It was opened with a key. Lady Charlotte, you alone possessed such a key, yet it was not yours that was employed. A duplicate existed, fashioned with subtlety, and placed into the hands of a trusted servant. James Ryder, attendant at the Cosmopolitan, had the opportunity, the fear, and the weakness to be so used. He removed the carbuncle at his master's bidding. But what then? A stone of such brilliance cannot be carried safely upon the person of a man like Ryder. He was instructed to conceal it, to place it within the body of a goose destined for market, a stratagem both ingenious and absurd. The bird was lost, the stone nearly vanished with it. Yet by a chain of accidents it came once more into my possession. Holmes drew the gleaming jewel from his pocket and held it aloft. The carbuncle sparkled fiercely in the lamplight, its depths as cold and merciless as ice. Lady Charlotte gasped. Lestrade leaned forward with avid satisfaction. "Now mark the next link," Holmes continued, his eyes fixed upon Sir Reginald. "Ryder's terror drove him not to flight, but to you. We observed his visits, we overheard your words. You counselled him to silence, promising to protect him with your influence. You, Sir Reginald, are the true architect of the theft." The accusation fell like a thunderclap. Lady Charlotte uttered a cry of horror. Lestrade half rose, his hand at his pocket-book. Sir Reginald alone remained outwardly composed, though a flush had mounted to his cheeks and his hands clenched upon the arm of the chair. "You dare much, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But where is your proof?" "You have clever conjecture, overheard fragments, the babblings of a frightened servant. Such trifles will never stand in a court of law." Holmes inclined his head. "That is precisely why I arranged this gathering. Lady Charlotte, will you be so good as to examine the key you carry to your safe?" With trembling fingers, she drew forth a small key attached to her reticule. Holmes produced another, almost identical, from his pocket. "This," he said, "was recovered by my young assistant from the pocket of Ryder himself, mere hours after his secret meeting. The filing marks, the alloy, even the slight burr at the teeth, match precisely. It was made from an impression of your own, Lady Charlotte, a task that required both access to your household and the assistance of a skilled locksmith, such as only a gentleman of influence could command. I need not say whose crest adorns the pouch in which it was found." Sir Reginald started forward, his composure slipping at last. "Lies and trickery!" he thundered. "You seek to ruin me with forgeries and inventions." But Holmes's gaze was merciless. "It is not I who have forged, Sir Reginald. The forgery is yours. The key, the friendship you abused, the honour you betrayed. Ryder may have been your tool, but your hand guided his every move. The Blue Carbuncle is but a stone. The true crime is the corruption of trust." Lestrade moved swiftly then, laying a firm hand upon the statesman's shoulder. Sir Reginald did not resist, but his eyes burned with a fury that made me shiver. "You have destroyed me, Holmes," he said hoarsely. "But beware, you have made an enemy who will not be forgotten." Holmes regarded him with cold detachment. "I destroy nothing, Sir Reginald. I merely reveal what already existed. The rest is for justice to decide." As the door closed behind the disgraced figure, silence descended upon the room. Lady Charlotte pressed a hand to her heart, tears standing in her eyes, while Lestrade muttered satisfaction at having a case so neatly tied. Holmes, however, sank back into his chair, his expression unreadable, the blue carbuncle gleaming in his palm like a frozen star. "Watson," he said quietly, "observe how fragile is the veneer of honour when temptation beckons. A man may climb high in the esteem of the world, yet a single flaw, a single stone, may drag him into ruin. Such is the lesson of the carbuncle. And though the jewel was at last restored, I could not shake the sense that the affair had unmasked more than a theft, that it had revealed, stark and terrible, the abyss that may yawn beneath even the most polished surface of society. The door had scarcely closed behind Lestrade and his prisoner when Lady Charlotte, her composure shaken but not extinguished, turned to Holmes with a grave inclination of the head. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "words cannot repay the service you have rendered. You have preserved not only my jewel but my good name, for had the truth remained hidden, suspicion must inevitably have fallen upon me. You have exposed the serpent in our midst, and for that I am indebted beyond expression." Holmes bowed slightly, though his expression betrayed no triumph. The truth, madam, is rarely a comfortable companion, but it is always the safer one. Your carbuncle is restored. I counsel you to secure it henceforth, where neither trust nor sentiment may endanger it again. A jewel may tempt the highest as surely as it lures the lowest. She pressed the jewel to her breast, nodded once more, and withdrew. For a long moment the ticking of the clock was the only sound in the room. Holmes sat motionless, his eyes fixed upon the smoke curling from his pipe. I had seen him in many moods, but never one quite like this. Half satisfaction, half melancholy, as though the unmasking of Darrow had cost him something unseen. At length I ventured, "Surely, Holmes, this is one of your most brilliant triumphs. You have unseated a man of influence who thought himself beyond the reach of the law." Holmes shook his head. "Triumph, Watson? I call it rather a necessary surgery. The carbuncle was but the instrument. It revealed the rot within a man whom society exalted. That rot would have spread had it not been checked. Yet do not mistake me, I feel no joy in striking down. The spectacle of corruption, however well disguised, leaves me with more weariness than pride." I had no reply to this sombre reflection, for indeed the grandeur of the statesman's fall still weighed heavily upon me. Yet scarcely an hour had passed when Mrs. Hudson entered, her face pale with agitation, bearing a hastily scribbled note. Holmes seized it and read aloud, "Holmes, be wary. Reginald's friends are not idle. A carriage was seen waiting near your lodgings after you left the yard. I fear they intend reprisal. Take precautions. L." The signature was unmistakable, Lestrade. Holmes's lips compressed into a thin line. "As I feared, Watson. The case is not concluded. We have struck at a man of position, and such men rarely fall alone. His associates may yet seek to silence either me or the evidence. It seems the carbuncle is not the only jewel at stake. The very jewel of justice is in peril." I confess my blood chilled at his words. The notion that shadowy forces might move against us in the dark alleys of London seemed no mere fancy. Holmes, however, sprang into action with the quick decision that always marked his most perilous adventures. He extinguished the lamp, drew the curtains tight, and motioned me to load my revolver. "Tonight we must watch and wait," he said. "If they mean mischief, they will show themselves, and if they do, we shall be ready." The hours crept by, thick with silence. From our darkened window we observed the street below. Once I thought I saw a figure linger by the lamp-post, then fade into the fog. Later, the distant rumble of wheels announced a carriage passing slowly, as though its occupants scanned the houses. Holmes, crouched beside me, whispered, "Note the crest upon the panel, Darrows. They circle like hounds, seeking their quarry." Suddenly a stone clattered against the shutters, followed by the rapid retreat of footsteps. Holmes rose instantly. "The signal, Watson. They mean to draw us out." "Then we shall not oblige them," I replied grimly, my revolver in hand. Holmes smiled faintly. "On the contrary, my dear fellow, we must oblige them, though not in the way they expect." Come before I could protest, he slipped noiselessly from the room, descending the stair like a shadow. I followed close behind, my nerves taut. At the corner of Baker Street we paused, concealed within the fog. The carriage loomed. Nearby, its horses steaming in the cold. Two figures lurked at its side, muffled and watchful. Holmes' eyes glittered. "Observe, Watson. They wait for their prey. Let us see whether we may not turn hunter upon the hunters." With sudden swiftness he darted across the street, seizing the nearer figure by the collar. The man gave a cry of alarm, but Holmes's grip was iron. I levelled my revolver at the second, who froze in his tracks. The carriage door flew open, and a third man emerged, only to be confronted by Holmes' cold command. Back inside, if you please. The game is finished. At that moment, Lestrade himself appeared from the opposite direction, flanked by 2 constables. He had anticipated just such an attempt and come to lend his aid. The ambushers were swiftly secured, their protests drowned by the clink of handcuffs. Holmes examined them coolly. "Hired rogues," he murmured, "not gentlemen. Darrow's purse still works in the shadows, but tonight it was purchased with disgrace." Lestrade clapped him heartily upon the shoulder. "You've done London a service, Mr. Holmes. With Darrow behind bars and his jackals in chains, the Yard may breathe easier." Holmes gave a faint shrug. "The Yard may breathe, but I doubt London shall. For every Darrow unmasked, there are 10 more who hide behind their honours. Still, 1 serpent less in the garden is worth the effort." We returned to Baker Street in the quiet hours before dawn, weary but unscathed. Holmes threw himself into his chair, his violin resting at his side. "Watson," he said at last, with that weary smile I knew so well, "the case of the Blue Carbuncle has shown us once more that evil wears many masks, from the trembling servant to the polished statesman. Yet in the end, the stone itself was but a trinket. The true prize was knowledge, and the true victory the unmasking of falsehood. Write it as you will, but remember this: the glitter of the gem is nothing beside the gleam of truth." And with that he drew his bow across the strings, filling the fog-laden dawn with music, as haunting as the case we had just endured. The last mournful strains of Holmes's violin still lingered in the air when a soft but insistent knock interrupted the fragile calm that had settled upon Baker Street. Holmes set the instrument aside with deliberate care, his keen eyes narrowing. "Strange, Watson," he murmured. "Few visitors call at this hour unless the matter is urgent or dangerous." I moved instinctively toward the revolver I had only recently laid aside, but Holmes raised a hand to stay me. He crossed the room and opened the door himself. There stood a young man, scarcely more than 20, his face pale beneath the brim of a battered hat. His clothes were respectable yet worn, suggesting a gentleman's upbringing fallen upon hard times. He removed his hat nervously and stepped inside when Holmes gestured for him to enter. "You are Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked in a strained voice. "I am. And you, sir?" "My name is Edward Harrow. I come not for myself, but for my father, Sir Alistair Harrow. He bade me seek you at once. It is a matter of life and death." Holmes's expression sharpened. "Your father is well known to me by reputation. An eminent scholar, if I'm not. What peril threatens him?" The young man clasped his trembling hands. "Since the arrest of Reginald Darrow, my father has been plagued by mysterious letters. Anonymous threats, each more menacing than the last. At first he dismissed them as the work of some malcontent, but last night—" He broke off, swallowing hard. "Last night the window of his study was shattered by a bullet. Had he not stooped at that moment to pick up a dropped book, he would have been struck dead." Holmes leaned forward, every line of his figure alive with attention. "You believe this is connected to Darrow?" "I cannot say. My father once served with Darrow in certain governmental inquiries. He fears there are secrets, dangerous secrets, that Darrow's allies would rather see buried with him." The gravity of the words was not lost upon me, nor upon Holmes, who lit a fresh pipe with swift precision. "Watson," he said quietly, "we must accompany Mr. Harrow at once. The noose we thought cut has revealed itself to be a net, spread far wider than we guessed." Within half an hour we were seated in a hansom, Edward Harrow opposite us, the lamplight throwing sharp lines across his anxious face as we rattled through the fog-bound streets toward Bloomsbury. Holmes questioned him closely as we went, and from his replies a picture emerged. Sir Alistair Harrow, a man of letters and influence, had once been part of a commission investigating corruption at high levels. Darrow had been among its members. Though the inquiry was officially suppressed, Harrow had retained certain documents, evidence that could, in the wrong hands, bring ruin to powerful figures. And now, Holmes murmured, with Darrow exposed, those figures tremble lest your father's papers should resurface. They mean to silence him before the storm breaks. At length, the cab drew up before a tall Georgian house, its windows dark, save for a faint glow upon the upper floor. A butler admitted us at once, his face lined with worry. We were shown into a study where Sir Alistair himself awaited us, a man of commanding presence, though bent by years, his hair silver, his eyes still sharp with intellect. Upon his desk lay a sheaf of letters, each penned in a crude hand, each bearing the same warning: burn the papers or perish. Holmes examined them swiftly, then moved to the shattered window where shards of glass still clung to the frame. He crouched, studying the angle, the depth of the wood, where the bullet had embedded. Rising, he said, fired from the garden wall. A poor shot in fog, but near enough to kill. Your enemies are desperate, Sir Alistair. The old man inclined his head gravely. So it would seem. Yet I cannot yield. These papers may one day be needed to cleanse the corruption festering in our government. If my life is the price, so be it. But I would not see my son as a victim either. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Then we must set a trap for these shadows before they strike again. He spent the next hour in close examination of the study, the garden, and the surrounding grounds, moving with quiet energy, while I assisted with a lamp and notebook. At last he returned, his plan formed. We shall keep watch tonight. The letters speak of haste. They will act again, and soon. If they come, we must be ready. Edward Harrow insisted on remaining with us, though his father urged him to go. Together we settled into a tense vigil, the lamps extinguished, the curtains drawn. Midnight came and went. The silence of the house was broken only by the creak of wood and the faint ticking of a clock. Then, without warning, a rustle at the garden wall, the whisper of feet upon gravel. Holmes touched my arm and gestured toward the window. In the dim moonlight I saw a shadowy figure raise an arm, the glint of steel catching faintly. Before the weapon could be discharged, Holmes gave a sharp whistle. From the darkness of the garden 2 constables sprang forth, Lestrade's men, whom Holmes had summoned earlier by discreet telegram. A struggle ensued, swift and violent, but the intruder was overpowered. When dragged into the light, his face was revealed, a clerk from the very commission on which Darrow and Harrow had served. Holmes regarded him coolly. So the circle widens. Darrow's associates feared exposure, and they sent their tool to do the deed. But the tool has snapped in their hand. The man, pale and beaten, muttered that he had been promised gold and safe passage abroad if he succeeded. Beyond that he would say nothing. Holmes folded his arms. They will not stop here, Watson. We have struck at one link, but the chain remains. The game that began with a stolen jewel has grown into something far more perilous. Until the last hand behind these threats is unmasked, none of us may rest easy. Sir Alistair placed a weary hand upon Holmes's arm. Then I place my trust wholly in you, Mr. Holmes. Protect my son if you can, and uncover the truth, whatever the cost. Holmes bowed his head solemnly. You may depend upon me, sir. The truth has many enemies, but it will not want a defender while I draw breath. And so, As the grey light of dawn stole through the battered window, we prepared ourselves for the next move in a game whose pieces were scattered across the highest and darkest chambers of power. The case of the Blue Carbuncle had ended, but its echo was drawing us into a deeper labyrinth where the glitter of jewels gave way to the glimmer of secrets, each more dangerous than the last. The long weeks that followed our night at Sir Alistair Harrow's residence were among the most arduous I can recall in all my association with Sherlock Holmes. The jewel, the fateful Blue Carbuncle, had proved the bait upon which larger, darker fish fed. Holmes pursued the case with a tireless energy that astonished even me, often disappearing for entire days in some low quarter of London, only to reappear gaunt and silent, his clothes reeking of pipe smoke and tavern air. At times he took on disguises so perfect that even I failed to recognize him when he passed me in the street. Through fragments pieced together from frightened clerks, disloyal servants, and one trembling pawnbroker who had unwittingly carried messages, Holmes traced the conspiracy to its head. Lord Fenwick, a man of impeccable public standing, seated high in government circles, whose genial smile cloaked an ambition as ruthless as it was secretive. "It is always the same, Watson," Holmes remarked one evening as he spread papers across our sitting-room table. "Scratch the gilt, and you will find corruption beneath. Fenwick used Darrow as his creature, first to steal the carbuncle as a means of raising illicit funds, then to divert attention from his more perilous schemes. When Darrow faltered, Fenwick sought to silence those who might betray him, Harrow most of all." "But how could we ever hope to prove it?" I cried. "A peer of the realm, protected, admired, what evidence could touch him?" Holmes' eyes gleamed with a fierce light. "The evidence that criminals always leave, my dear fellow, their own hands. Fenwick has been careless. He believes himself too mighty to be caught. That arrogance will prove his undoing." The plan Holmes devised was bold in its simplicity. Sir Alistair agreed to play his part, feigning compliance with the threats he had received. An invitation was dispatched to Lord Fenwick, offering to hand over the damning papers in exchange for his silence. The meeting was arranged in Harrow's study, with Lestrade and his men concealed beyond a hidden door, and Holmes and I watching from the shadows. The night of the encounter was one I shall never forget. Fenwick arrived precisely at the appointed hour, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his manner calm but his eyes restless. He greeted Sir Alistair with a false cordiality that scarcely masked the steel beneath. "You are wise at last, Harrow," he said smoothly. "The documents have been a danger to us both. Best that they are destroyed." Sir Alistair laid a packet upon the desk. "They are here, but you must assure me my son shall not be harmed." Fenwick's smile deepened, and in that instant his mask slipped. "Your son? My dear Harrow, you ask too much." Loose tongues run in families. He reached into his cloak, and Holmes stepped forward, striking the weapon from his hand with a swiftness that startled even me. In the tumult that followed, Fenwick was seized, his protestations drowned by Lestrade's firm voice, reading the charges against him. The packet on the desk, far from containing the true documents, held only blank pages. The real evidence had already been placed in safe custody by Holmes. As Fenwick was led away, I beheld in him not the mighty statesman, but a ruined man, his grandeur shrivelled in the light of truth. Sir Alistair clasped Holmes's hand, his eyes bright with gratitude. "You have saved us all, Mr. Holmes. History will record the debt we owe you." Holmes shook his head. "History will record only the facts, Sir Alistair. Men such as Fenwick are weeds that choke the garden. It is our duty merely to pull them up when we find them." Later, as we returned through the quiet streets toward Baker Street, I could not restrain my admiration. You saw through it all from the beginning, Holmes, the duel, Darrow, the threats, every thread leading back to Fenwick. I confess I doubted more than once. He smiled faintly, the night air curling his breath into white mist. My dear Watson, the jewel was but the glint that drew the eye. Yet the true value lay in the shadows it cast. Once we saw that the crime was too elaborate for Darrow alone, the rest followed naturally. "And what now?" I asked. "Will you not take some rest after such a long struggle?" Holmes gave a short laugh. "Rest? There is always another case, Watson. London is never without its puzzles, its intrigues, its crimes. I am content only when the game is afoot. Besides—" He drew his coat more tightly about him and gazed toward the lamp-lit horizon. "The hunt is ever sweeter than the kill." And so the matter of the Blue Carbuncle, which had begun with a chance encounter in a frosty street, ended with the unmasking of a peer and the preservation of a man's honor. Yet as I set down these words, I cannot but marvel at the strange, winding path by which Holmes, with his unmatched genius, drew light from darkness and order from chaos. He would dismiss it as mere deduction, but to me it remains nothing less than a miracle wrought in the heart of London's fog.